Hey everybody, Bob Gager from Adobe here, and it's time to hang out with Bob. This is an opportunity where I get to do a live broadcast out to people who are using Photoshop Elements and show some tips and tricks and some techniques on how to get the most out of your photos with Photoshop Elements based on the questions that you guys are having. So if you're watching live, welcome. If you're watching after the fact, welcome as well. Unfortunately, any questions you ask if you're after the fact, I can't answer live, but that's okay. Hopefully you'll get something out of this as well. So it's a bit free form, not a lot of practice ahead of time. The whole idea is just sort of have a casual interaction with you guys to show you what you can do inside of Photoshop Elements. So today we're going to spend some time talking about sharpening your photos. To get a good photo so that you're sort of proud of it and want to print it or use it in a scrapbook page or a greeting card or a calendar or a photo book or whatever. Having nice, sharp, crisp photos is often an important thing for folks. So we're going to talk about sharpening today and some of the things that some of the tips that are there inside of Photoshop Elements to help you get real nice, sharp photos. So a little logistics first. If you are watching live, you can actually ask me questions as we go. I'll try and remember to switch back to this screen to see your questions, because while I'm sharing my screen, I actually can't see the questions list. But if you are live, up here somewhere is a little grid, 3x3 grid. Click on that and it'll let you open the questions panel. So over on the right hand side there's a questions panel. If you open it and show it, you can type in your question and then I'll come back and try and answer those questions for you as we go. So there you go. Let me start to share my screen. Let's see, so we can show you some of the cool things in Photoshop Elements. So screen share, I'm just going to go ahead and share the whole desktop so you can see everything that's going on. Of course, I need to hide that, and I need to hide that, and okay, we're good to go. Excuse me. So let's talk a little bit about sharpening photos. Now, sharpening photos can come in lots of different ways. The first sort of thing I want to show off that you can do in Photoshop Elements, it's really cool. This is actually a new feature that we added in Photoshop Elements 14. So if you don't have 14, this isn't going to work for you, but if you have 14, this is a really powerful feature. So I got a lot of photos here. This is my cat. I think we'll probably use my cat today because sharpening around fur is kind of interesting. So the first thing I want to do is open this photo here. I click on it and then I can come down in the action bar in the bottom and click Editor, and that will open up the photo. This happens to be a photo that I shot in RAW format, so when I open it, it opens up in Adobe Camera Raw. Now Adobe Camera Raw actually has some built-in sharpening. So over here, these little tabs right here, if I switch from the Adjust tab to the Detail tab, this section up top is about sharpening and also noise reduction. But if you start to slide these sliders around, you can get a sharper photo. Now this particular photo, this actually doesn't do a lot to, because it's actually very blurry, incredibly blurry, because when I captured this photo, I don't remember whether it was my hand that was moving or my cat that was moving, but there's a little sort of shake blur happening in this photo. So the sharpening inside of Camera Raw here actually isn't going to do anything for me, but what I want to do is just come down to Open Image, and then I'll go ahead and open up this image. Let me close my photo bin and zoom in just a little bit so we can see the picture a little better. There you go. I'm even going to hide my layers panel because we're not really working with layers today. We just want to see the image. All right, so, well, actually, no. I take that back. Let me show my layers panel again, because I want to make a copy of this layer, just drag and drop it onto the new layer icon so that when I'm editing this layer, we can very quickly go back and forth. Now I can hide my layers panel. All right. So the new feature I want to show off is under the Enhance menu, and it's called Shake Reduction. Now there's actually two ways to get rid of this blurriness caused by either a shaky subject or a shaky camera. There's sort of an automatic shake reduction, where the software will figure out how to fix a photo and get rid of the blur caused by shake. Or there's a little more manual process, this thing called shake reduction ... down at the bottom, again, of the enhance menu. I'm going to go ahead and pick that one because it gives us a little bit of control over what's going on. And what the software does here is actually go in and analyze your photo, figure out how the photo or the subject and or camera were moving when the photo was captured. And then based on that knowledge it has about what was going on at the time you captured the image, provide some sharpening and blur reduction to try and re-edit the pixels to get rid of that shake. There's this kind of big grid here. You can move this around to sort of put it on top of where you think the shake could be most improved. The software actually does a pretty good job of putting it in the right spot to begin with. But if you want to try moving it around to get different results, you can do that. And then as you can see, excuse me, it reanalyzes the photo and based on where you put that square and reapplies the shake reduction. And then importantly, there's this sensitivity slider down here in the bottom left. For this photo, this is a pretty blurry photo. The normal position doesn't really do a whole lot, but if I crank that all the way up, my photo is readjusted, and hopefully you can see at the end here, we're going to start to get some crispness back in a photo that is kind of a cool close-up shot of my cat, but unfortunately was incredibly blurry because I was shaking the camera at the time. So maybe I'll put it back where the software put it originally. And let it get finished here in a second. You can also add multiple shake analysis regions. This little box right here lets me, if I click that, it'll add another one of these boxes, and then I can put them in different spots around my photo. I'm just going to leave it as one because the more you add, the better job it does, but also the more time it takes to analyze your photo. There's a lot of heavy-duty image processing stuff going on here to make the magic happen. So in the interest of time, I'll just leave one there. You can see it takes a little bit of time even with just one. All right, so there's the results. If we click before, hopefully the screen capture is coming across Google Hangout screen sharing well, but that's the before and that's the after. Just a little sharper. Let me hit OK to go apply to my main image. So once I sort of get it looking like I want it in the preview, if I then hit OK, it then goes back and reapplies the same parameters that I had set to my full resolution image. Now this is a pretty high-res image, so it takes a little while, but now it's done. So you can see we're a little bit sharper. There's still a little bit of blurriness going on, but if I zoom in, quite a bit, this is the after. And if I hide that layer, that's the before. So it's done, a pretty nice job of taking a photo that I probably would have thrown away because it's just too blurry and sharpening it up a bit. So that is shake reduction. Let me close this one and don't save. So actually I want to switch to a different photo. Let me switch back to the Google Hangout thing. Okay, no questions, so that's good. Move that down. There we go. So now let's take a different photo that actually has started off, not so blurry. My cat was either not moving or my hand wasn't moving when I took this shot. Similar shot, but just a little better shot. So I can select it. I can open it in the editor by coming down here and click the edit button. I could also just right-click on it and say edit with Photoshop Elements Editor. That's actually the way I open photos most time. Or I could actually use the Control-I keyboard shortcut to quickly open a photo for editing. So again, this is shot in RAW. I can come in and do some quick RAW adjustments. Lots of times I'll just hit auto, let the software figure out how this should be adjusted. That's maybe a little brighter than my desire, so I'll turn the exposure down. I tend to like to crank the blacks up a little bit. It gives it that more contrasty look, and maybe even boost clarity a little bit in my RAW photos. Again, I could use the sharpening here in Camera Raw. I could crank that up, but if you don't shoot in RAW course, you don't have access to any of this stuff. So I'll just kind of leave that alone, open the image in the editor, and maybe show you some techniques that I would use to sharpen up this image. Now, this is kind of a cool image because it's got a real nice shot of my cat's eye. And often what you want to do is really get your eyes nice and sharp in an image to make them stand out. And so there's lots of different ways to sharpen images. Many of them are under the Enhance menu. Sort of the first one I want to show off is kind of not intuitive the way we've named it. It's had this name forever, long before my tenure here at Adobe, called Unsharp Mask. And believe it or not, you use something called Unsharp Mask to sharpen your image. So what you typically want to do is look at 100%. And so we open up at 100%. Drag your photo around to find something that you might want to focus on in your sharpening work. As I mentioned, I kind of want to use the eye as the focal point of where I want to sharpen stuff. And then it's just kind of a matter of sliding the sliders until you get the result you want. So we can crank this way up and we get some sharpening going on. Now that's a little grainy if you do too much. You can mess with the radius slider and the threshold slider, and both of these are going to control the results of what this Unsharp Mask sharpening technique is going to do. Oops, let me cancel out of this because I want to do it on a layer. Let's rename that layer Unsharp Mask so that when we come back later with different techniques, we can actually see the differences that different techniques are going to give us. So again, back to Enhance, Unsharp Mask, move over somewhere to where I think I want to focus my sharpening activity. Again, kind of around the eye, if you will. And then mess around with the radius. The radius sort of controls how many pixels around any particular pixel. It's doing some analysis to do the sharpening. Threshold is how many levels of sharpening it provides. If I crank it way up, it actually kind of makes things a little more blurry. I want to just keep a couple levels, keep it lower here until I get the look I want. I can zoom in more if I want, but 100% is the typical one you want. Maybe crank it up a little bit. And this preview button shows us a before and after. So if I uncheck it, it's probably hard to see across Google screen sharing, but there is some very slight sharpening going on. And if I hit OK, it'll go ahead and apply that to my entire image. If I double click and zoom into the eye, maybe move that to the center of my photo, hide that layer, you can see the before. You can see maybe on some of the fur around here. When I show that layer, you can see just a little bit of sharpness coming on, so the fur stands out a little more than it did in the original image. So that's the before, and that's the after. So Unsharp Mask is sort of technique one that you can use to sharpen your photos. I don't often use Unsharp Mask. I'm just going to turn it off. It does sharpening, but you know, sort of not the way I like sharpening done. The next technique that I want to show you is actually sort of a combination of things. Well, actually, I'll hold that off. So let me drag and drop my background layer up to my new layer again, because the next one under the Enhance menu is just Adjust Sharpness. So let's call this layer Adjust Sharpness, because that's the technique that we're going to use. Make sure that layer is selected. My Unsharp Mask layer is hidden because I clicked on the little eyeball. And then just go into the Enhance menu and pick Adjust Sharpness. And so this is similar. Let's kind of come back over to the eye, which is where we're going to focus our sharpening work today, the eye and some of the fur around there. And similar to Unsharp Mask, I have a couple sliders. I can crank the amount way up, and you can see it becomes, you know, higher sharpening around the fur. This preview around the eye, we can start to see some kind of graininess happening. That's the downside of sharpening, is it often creates some grainy kind of stuff. Again, I can mess with the radius of how many pixels it's using to analyze the photo. You can see if I crank that way up, we get some really weird effects going on, right? That actually may be a kind of cool effect to way over sharpen. But if you're just trying to make your photo look natural, you want to leave this kind of low. and adjust the amount to kind of get the effect that you want without getting it too sharp. Again, we have a preview, so I can turn it off. You see the sharpness goes away in my image, or back on, and now I can see the results of sharpening. There's also some advanced features. I'm going to sort of skip these in the interest of time, but if you open up the sharpening around shadows or highlights, you can really fine-tune how the sharpening algorithms work on your photo and try and get some of the results that you want. There's also different kinds of blur that you can try and remove. So either Gaussian blur, that sort of changes the algorithm that it uses to sharpen, or lens blur, if the blur is probably caused by your lens, you can try and correct for that perspective, or motion blur, again, sort of back to that shake reduction. This was an earlier version of shake reduction, which is motion blur, and that's a different technique. So you can try the different types of blur to remove. But typically Gaussian blur, the default is the one that you just want to leave it to. You can also, once you sort of make these adjustments, one of the cool things about this adjust sharpness feature is you can save this as a preset and then later on load presets. And so if you have a whole bunch of photos that need to be adjusted in the exact same way, you can fine tune one, save those settings as a preset, and then reuse that same preset over and over again. So that'll really speed up your workflow to make processing a bunch of photos much faster. So that's the adjust sharpness. Again, let me crank it up maybe a little more and hit OK. That'll go sharpen our photo. Again, let me zoom in a bit here so you can see the results. All right, so that is the after, and again, that's the before. Right, before is a little blurry, and then we sharpened it up with this adjust sharpness feature under the enhance menu, sort of down towards the bottom. So that's another technique that you can use. The next one, let me hide that one. Back to our original. Make another copy of our layer. Rename this layer high pass, because this is another technique that's not quite so obvious, but I find it to do a really good job of sharpening your photos inside of Photoshop Elements. Let me switch back to Google Hangouts to see if there are any questions. No questions, okay, so we'll just keep cranking along. So high pass is a technique. I again want to have this separate layer, have that layer selected, come under my filter menu, and all the way down at the bottom of the different filter categories is a category called Other, right? This is where we put stuff that kind of didn't have a home. And in the Other category is a high pass filter. So go ahead and click high pass. High pass, at first it's going to kind of look gray, or maybe anywhere in between. Depends where you had this set last time. But basically what high pass does is sort of look at the frequency of changes in your photo and do a filtering, turn things that don't change very rapidly into sort of a 50% gray, and then where we have some high frequency changes, so around things like fur, where the image is changing from one color pixel to another color pixel very rapidly, turn that into a level of white. And the radius slider here controls sort of how that algorithm works. What you want to do is slide it down to the point where you're just kind of getting, let me move to a different area in the preview, you're just starting to see the edges of stuff. So this is way too much, right? I can still see my cat. Getting a little better as I crank this down. If I crank it too far, it's just all gray. I need to see some of those edges. And so you can play around with different settings, but you're after kind of something like this, where I'm just seeing some of the edges pop out as white. The rest of my image is just kind of full on 50% gray. And then hit OK, and that'll go apply that high pass filter to my whole image. And now the trick is, with this high pass layer selected, the blending mode, that's this little pull down right here at the top of our layers panel, change the blending mode to overlay. And that's going to sharpen our image. Again, let me zoom in 1:1 so we can see some of the before and after. So you can see now a lot of the fur around the eye, we're getting some nice crisp sharpness going on. If I hide that layer, we're back to our blurry original or back to our sharped version using this high pass technique. And you can also play around with a couple different blending modes to get different amounts of sharpening. So overlay is sort of a medium one. You can have it be softer by picking soft light. You can have it be stronger by picking hard light. And so that's a real crisp sharpening that's going on. So depending upon what look you're after, play around with those 3 different blending modes using the high pass filter to get your photo to look a little sharper. All right, back to our original because we've hidden that layer. And then one final technique that I want to show off that actually is something that I use quite a bit is something called graphic novel filtering. Again, not at all obvious that you can use this to sharpen your photo, but I really like the technique that it creates. So I'll take my background layer, again, drag it to my new layer to make a copy, double click the name, and I'm going to rename this layer graphic novel so we can remember which layer has this graphic novel technique applied. So with that layer selected, again, back to our filter menu, down into the sketch category. Over in the sketch category, we have a filter called graphic novel. Go ahead and select that. And that's going to pop this up. And there's lots of different, graphic novel looks that you might play around with. An interesting filter just by itself to kind of get interesting looks for your photos. But what I found is if you pick this painted gray one, take this clean look slider and crank it all the way up to clean. And then depending upon the resolution of your photo, you might want to adjust the thickness slider. Let me zoom into 1:1. So if we look real close, you can see it's creating this kind of really weird ripply effect. But converting things to some level between gray and black, based again a lot on this sort of edge detection algorithm stuff that's going on. If I take the thickness slider and come down a little bit, those lines are thinner. And if I go up, they're thicker. Right? Again, kind of what you would expect. And you want to get kind of little thin lines, maybe something like that. And the place you want this slider is going to totally depend on the resolution of your image. So bring your image in, play around with the thickness slider to get kind of some thin lines. It's also often good, this smoothness button, just sort of click it twice to add 2 levels of smoothness. That kind of cleans up some of the chunky edges, and then hit OK. And this graphic novel filter will be applied to your high resolution image. Now, once that's done, and it'll be faster, if you have a lower resolution image than it's kind of taken forever because it's actually a high resolution image off of my camera. But, as I mentioned, this graphic novel filter is kind of cool looking all by itself, I think. But we're going to go back like we did with the high pass filter, change the blending mode to a different blending mode to get a sharpening effect on top of our image. So while that's working, let me switch back, make sure there's no questions. Looks like there's no questions. Okay, good. In fact, nobody's tuned in yet, so I'm talking to myself in a live broadcast. But that's okay because it is being recorded and you guys are going to watch it later to be able to take advantage of some of these techniques. Okay, so we're almost done with the application of the graphic novel filter. Oops, for some reason it switched back to the organizer. We don't want to do that. So you can see now we've got that. If I zoom in all the way, you can see some of that kind of squirrely stuff that it's done for me. Zoom back out. But now with this graphic novel layer selected, I changed the blending mode not to overlay, soft or hard light this time, but all the way at the bottom is something called luminosity. And that's going to cause that black and white layer, different levels of gray, with white being where the edges are, to basically adjust the luminosity or the brightness of the layer underneath it. And so once that's done, let me zoom in again. Here we go, something like that, is wherever we had white, let me change blending mode back again to normal, right? So wherever we had kind of brighter spots in this graphic novel layer, it brightens up my image, and wherever we had darker spots of my underlying image, it sort of leaves it alone. So it's a way to fine-tune some brightening of edges of your image. And so that's, again, that's the before, that's the after. Kind of gives that little sharper look when we're zoomed all the way in. If you're zoomed all the way out, again, that's the before, kind of a, you know, interesting but mediocre image from a sharpness perspective. And then if I turn that layer back on, you can see the after, where it sort of brightens the edges of things to give that sharpening effect. If it does it too much, then the way to fine tune it is to adjust the opacity of this layer. That's what this control does here. If I tune it down, it'll be much less. If I go all the way to 0, then it's as if I had hidden that layer, and so there's no effect applied. If I go to like 50%, then it brings part of it back. If I go all the way up to 100%, it'll bring all of it back. So that's a way to adjust adjust some sharpness using a different technique called the graphic novel filter. So that's sort of 4 different ways. Let me zoom in again here, kind of around the hair and fur, so you can see hopefully the results of the different techniques. So let's turn them all off. There's our original. This first one, again, back to the unsharp mask. That sort of just sharpens some edges, creates a little grainy look. I don't like it, but maybe that's the effect that you're looking for. And it also may work well on the image. A lot of these techniques, the one you're going to want to use is really dependent on the image that you're after. So that's the unsharp mask version. Here is the adjust sharpness version. Again, a little sharper, but a little more grainy, if you will. Turn that off. Here's the high pass technique. This is one of my favorite go-to techniques, right? Again, create that high pass filter and adjust the blending mode to overlay. And then finally, my favorite technique, this graphic novel technique, because not only does it sharpen, but it gives your photo kind of an interesting quality that people don't normally see in a lot of photos. The other thing that you can do with any of these techniques is selectively adjust where in your photo it's sharpened. And you do that with layer masks. If you've seen any of my tutorials, you'll know I use a lot of layers and a lot of layer masks. Layers and layer masks really open a lot of the potential inside Photoshop elements. So if you want to really advance your editing techniques, getting familiar with them is really important. Now, this really isn't a tutorial on them, but if you go do a Google search for Photoshop elements, layer masks, explained or whatever, and watch a couple of tutorials, you'll see kind of the power they can unfold. But if I add a layer mask to this layer, it's all white. The way layer masks works is everywhere it's white, that layer is shown. Everywhere it's black, it's hidden. If I just go grab my paint bucket and switch to black, and with the layer mask selected, I select it by clicking on it, and this little blue rectangle is around it. I just click on my image. It's going to paint black everywhere in that layer mask, and you can see my sharpening went away. And then I switch to my brush. I switch to white. I get a kind of softest brush that I want. Maybe make it a little bigger. Not that big. Something like that. I know it's probably hard to see my brush size. But let me get it about the size I want. Let me hide my tool options so we can see our eye. Then I come in again with my layer mask showing. Oops, is my brush? Yeah, all the way to 100%. That's good. I can paint in exactly where I want the sharpening to happen. So I'm just sort of painting around the eye. You can see over here in my layer mask, I've now got white where the eye is, and I've got black everywhere else. So that layer is only being applied around the eye. So the sharpening from this graphic novel technique is only being put on the eye. Again, if I turn it off, you can see now the eye is blurry again. Turn it back on. It's only the eye that is getting affected. So that's a way to selectively sharpen certain areas of your photo and not sharpen other areas of the photo. And then one final thing, at least, for this image that I might do, I might want to do this to the other eye, although it's pretty dark. so we can't really see the technique. But sharpening eyes is often a really great way to make your photos pop. And one thing in this eye, the catch light that's actually on the black part of the eye here is a bit distracting. So I'm going to add another layer. I'm going to get my brush. I'm going to switch to black. I'm going to make my brush pretty small. And I'm just going to paint black around that to really make that all the way black. Again, I'm painting on this layer, right? I'm not painting on my image. I'm painting on a layer on top of that. And I'm really going to just get rid of that catch light in the pupil by painting black. Let me zoom out a little bit because the results are sort of more interesting when we see the whole face, right? So there's with the catch light, pretty subtle. I can see it there, and there's without it. And I think that just sort of crisps up the image. I could also play around with this reflection of the window, catch light of the window in my cat's eye if I wanted to get rid of that as well. So hopefully that gives you a feel for some of the sharpening techniques inside of Photoshop Elements that you can bring to bear on your photo. Again, with the one you might want to use is going to depend on your photo, its resolution. Play around with all of them until you find the one you like, and then you just can save out your photo either in Photoshop Elements native format of Photoshop, file save. If I leave it set to the Photoshop format, all of these layers and adjustments and all that stuff will be preserved in the file, and I can come back later and fine tune them. Or if you're happy with the results, you don't think you want to come back later, you can just change to JPEG format. All of that stuff will get flattened into a single layer and saved as a JPEG that you can upload to Facebook or wherever you might share your photos, Twitter, Flickr, or print them, send them off to your favorite printing service and have them printed. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel. So there you go. Let me switch back to Google Hangouts. Let me turn off screen sharing. There we go. Stop screen sharing. We'll get rid of all of that. Looks like we still have no questions in the question pod. I see someone has joined late. Welcome if you joined late. Not sure when you joined along the way because I couldn't see that. But we've sort of reached the end of our sharpening tutorial. It's all been recorded, so you can come back and watch it after the fact. If you do have a quick question, and over here on the right, you don't see a questions panel. There's a little grid, 3x3 grid up here somewhere. Go ahead and click on that. There's a pull down with a bunch of different options. Show the question panel, and you can type a question over here. I'll give you just a second in case you have a question you'd like to see answered live. But hopefully you joined soon enough that you saw some of the techniques that are available to you. So that's kind of it for this Hangout with Bob. I'm going to try and get in a regular habit of doing these. Maybe shoot for this time every week. I don't know. I got to figure out when I can work that into my schedule as sort of a constant recurring thing. But you can keep a lookout on our Facebook page. Feel free to post questions there of how to do different things, and I'll try and add those into the Hangout. Question. I wasn't able to see you in this Hangout, so what did I do wrong? Hey, Carol. I'm not sure what you did wrong. I'm not yet an expert in Google Hangouts. Hopefully you can see me now. But after the fact, the same link that got you here will play back the recording for this Hangout, and so you can go back through that. And then hopefully any questions you might have had about sharpening, I explained along the way. So yeah, sorry, I'm not sure exactly what went wrong, whether it was something with Google or my usage of Google Hangouts. Hopefully it wasn't my usage of Google Hangouts, because it has worked before. But this link will be the same link that I posted on the Facebook page, as well as on my profile page in Google+. You can always go there and replay the video and skip around play it over and over again for the parts that might be more interesting to you. So hopefully we got your question answered. If you've got another question, go ahead and type it in now, and I'll see if I can answer it real quick. Otherwise, I think that's kind of the end of this Hangout with Bob. Look for more in the future. You can always come back to my Google profile page and look for these events, these Hangout with Bob events. I'm going to try and do them on a weekly basis and post the event a couple days in advance with the timing. Again, I'm trying to figure out a timing that I can do consistently so people can kind of plan ahead of time when they might want to come hang out with me. Can you please just explain how this works? Well, let's see. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by this. By this, do you mean how Google Hangouts works, or how sharpening in Photoshop Elements works? So maybe if you could clarify your question a little bit that way, Carol, that would help me make sure I'm answering the right question, as opposed to explaining something that doesn't make any sense for me. So I'll wait just a second to see if you can type in a new question with a little more around what this is. Maybe while we're waiting, I'll switch back to Photoshop Elements. Let me do my, oops, sorry, let me cancel that. You were available at 2 o'clock, but you didn't see me. Yeah, I don't know if you clicked in Google Hangouts. If you go to the event and click on it, it may be that you got there before I started. I was actually a couple minutes late, unfortunately. So right at 2 o'clock, actually, the Hangout had not started. But if you came like 5 minutes after, things had gotten started, and you should just be able to click on the watch button, excuse me, inside Google Hangouts, and it should start playing inside your browser. So it's kind of the same thing that got you here now. I'm assuming you can see me and whatnot, because you're able to ask some questions. Actually, the same way you got in should have worked. Not sure why it wouldn't have, as long as you didn't show up before I was here. If you did try right at 2 o'clock, then sorry I wasn't here yet, and that's why you probably couldn't have seen me. But hopefully you got it figured out. Not sure what else to provide as advice around using Google Hangouts. Maybe let me switch. Let me share my screen again. Share my desktop, start the screen share. Let me switch back to Google Hangouts. Oops, let me switch. Where do I want to go? Can I even do that? Yeah, this page. So this is the page that you probably see. Yeah, and so really all you need to do is, when you're on this page for the Google Hangout, click this big play button, which is probably what you did, and that would get you in there, which I think it looks like that's probably what happened. Let me come back to this, stop my screen sharing. I can see you now, but should I have gone to Hangouts on YouTube? No, you should have been able to come into that page I was just showing, click on the play button, and see the view. Not sure why it didn't work for you initially. Again, sorry, it could have been because you were there at 2 o'clock and I was a bit late. That might have been the cause. But certainly the link will work. You can come back and watch it after the fact. And if you don't get if in the various techniques I showed around sharpening, I didn't sort of give you some feel for how to sharpen a photo, just post a question on the Google Hangouts page, and I'll try and come back and answer those if you post any there. So that's about it. I do have to wrap it up because I've got to run to something else. Sorry, we can't hang out a little longer, Carol. But hopefully watching back to the recording will give you some of the sharpening techniques that you're after for Photoshop Elements. So take care, and until next time, have fun with Photoshop Elements. Cheers.